The Patriot movement came out of what was called the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty were a constituency of oddfellows who rallied around the idea of joining the American Revolution that had been spawned by the Moors from South America all the way up to Canada, which was now leading to the rise of republics. And so because the United States Corporation was under two crowns, meaning the crown of the British or British, and then the crown of the so-called Vatican. But both Vatican and British crowns were under the so-called imperial crown or Moorish crown, by which they all paid tribute, because up until this point, Christians were being enslaved in mass throughout the world, right? This is in white history or Caucasian history, this is referred to as the Christian slave narratives, or the Christian or captured Christian narratives. You know what I'm saying? So these are volumes upon volumes of stories of people being taken from the caves and places like that, and then being brought in society and turned into Janissaries and Mamelukes and these things that became freed and accepted into the houses of the European powers. European powers being those nationals of the European family, the one beige family that was running the whole thing, of which was then broken up into subsectors like the King of Denmark, the King of France, to this, to that. But those were all ceremonial titles up until the 1400s. Up until the 1400s, there was none of that. After the 1400s, that's what really created the birth of Europe. So the Renaissance or the rise of Europe was synonymous with the fall of the empire in terms of the people in mass. You know what I'm saying? So when we see things like this now, where they are openly showing you remnant history in the form of currency, you know, both in the silver and the gold, this is now dealing with the angelic frequency of what so-called America, or we understand America to be. Because the goal is to make America great again. So in that, you see here, you got the Moor with the fez under the flag of South Carolina, the same place where the Sundry Free Moors Act happened, which took place before, which basically says that if any Moors was to get into any problems with the new transfer of government, that those Moors would fall under the international treaty protection and the jurisdiction of the Sultan of that time, of the imperial aspect of that time. The people who enforced the Sultan's will in some parts of the war was the British. So then when we see this now with the black woman with the liberty representing culture, and as you can see, culturally, she's correct. She don't got a perm. So because the four corners of the earth now are moving towards this direction, they're moving in that fashion, albeit slowly, through the present administration and its white nationalist Grand Orient Lodge based system. He said the European would be made to tell the truth, and he also said he was going to keep the European around long enough to show you how to run a government. But to the face, the government that he's shown us is biased, right? So in that is then when Droit says that, is he saying that we're supposed to acknowledge the face of the government, meaning that if he's keeping them around long enough for them to show us how it's done, how they're doing it to the face is illegal. So by that 10, because he didn't say, and we follow it like that, it's now based on our understanding of how that government is to be run. You understand what I'm saying? because the basic tenets and structure of the imperial aspect, meaning the empire aspect of the the temple, or excuse me, the Moorish Americans as a people, those offices was closed. And only recently, things being done to open that aspect of it up. So the imperial aspect of, let's say, what we understand Moorish science, or what it is to be Moorish Americans, or members of the so-called Asiatic race, all these classifications and definitions, these are just really placeholders to keep us from falling into terms that are not indicative of what we're striving to do. What you're striving to do is free yourself from the municipal entanglements that come with being a so-called citizen of the United States, meaning somebody created under the, the Act of Washington, D.C., which we'll go into, which then also proves that there's a difference between United States nationals or American nationals or American so-called citizens. So when you hear Moors now getting into the Indian thing, proving this and that about what tribe or this, that's all dope. But we can't forsake, like, if we don't have the domestic basis established, then of course you can't deal with the international aspect of whatever you're dealing with, first and foremost. So you first want to get the understanding of public to private and what that corresponds to you as a person of Moorish descent, which is significantly different than the appendage of African descent, which then would put you under what they call the 14th Amendment, which we'll show and prove tonight was never ratified. So you have people going into other so-called nationalities or terms, trying to use those to describe them, meaning that they are now creating a box, and based on what it said, okay, the Moorish shit ain't working out, so I'm gonna be Ethiopian. So now that means I have to fit into what the Ethiopian is without first. But in that now, whatever the Moorish thing is, that has to now be incorporated into being Ethiopian. You see what I'm saying? Instead of establishing the Moorish thing first and then attaching the Ethiopian thing as a secondary or analogous form of expression, of national expression. Meaning, if I take a cow from Arkansas, right, that cow would be killed in slaughterhouse. But if I take that same cow and bring it to New Delhi, then if anybody touched that cow, they would be taken to the slaughterhouse. You understand what I'm saying? You see the difference in the dimension of how people understand the object. But in both instances, the cow has not changed. The cow is still a cow from Arkansas. You understand what I'm saying? So it's an American cow in Arkansas, but it's now under the rules and regulations of New Delhi. You understand? But what if the cow could maintain its relationship to Arkansas by being American while staying and observing the so-called customs and laws of New Delhi? Such as the term Indian or American Indian. At one time, that meant the copper-colored people or whatever. And now you hear the term Native American. And we're supposed to believe that the people who are claiming to be Native American today are the same people who at the time who were referred to American Indian, meaning that those people who were melanated, who went from American Indian to Negro through the census. So we're supposed to believe that the people who are on the reservations and all that today are the direct descendants of those people, right? So when we say Native American, this person is saying that they are the direct descendant then of these American Indians, right? That's what they're saying, right? Okay, so then the term Native American is referred to the pale European people with a relatively established history in the United States of America, opposed to the recent immigrants who held the nativist point of view. Ironically, it did not refer to the actual first humans who settled the land. The leader of the Native American Party was a Jewish person named Louis Charles Levine, who owned allegedly Apache, a Comanche chick, and then had a baby with her, and then through the Dawes Rolls set up the Native American Party to bring people of Jewish and Irish descent and settle them in the so-called New World as Native Americans. This is why they look the way that they do, and they don't look like you. And the real Native Americans with the so-called Indian in their family believed that they was imported from Africa, which some were, right? But that doesn't change the overall majority of what was happening at the time that these changes took place in, or what has become the modern world. You know what I'm saying? So when they talk about the American Revolution, they're talking about the white insurgency, the so-called white Freemasonic, let's say Scottish Rite influenced, well, what became Scottish Rite influenced uh, lodge of white and amalgamated Freemasons who, after the war, went back to Europe and then left the states to be governed in what would become the states to be governed by their ruling class, because they got the native people to accept the European form of law, which was admiralty at the time, and become liege subjects to the European nobles instead of the indigenous nobles, right? Well, so when we talk about the American Revolution, we're talking about the first and second and third Carib War, right? We're talking about everything that happened on the continent between 1511 and 1774. So we're talking about the Maroon Wars, the Carib Wars, the wars in what they call the Seminole Wars, the French Indian War, the uh, like I said, the so-called Seminole Wars, the Black Hawk War. All of those were a part of what was becoming the American Revolution, because the revolt was against colonization and the removing of the titles of the indigenous people. The term, like I said, Native American is describing those people who were from Europe who integrated into so-called tamed Indian tribes. So as you can see here, if this was the Black Carib Indians and the Caribs was the first people there, then what blacks were these people bringing there that wasn't already looking like them? It don't make sense. It said, so allegedly we're to believe that all these people were from Africa. Well, if they were all from Africa, then why are they now here in this painting, right? With these people who are allegedly from Europe, right? But these people have obviously their own government, because there's no chains on these people, and all these people got on turbans. So to say that the Maroons were only indigenous to Jamaica is a misnomer, because the term Maroon applied to all of the Moors of the old empire who were against the mass colonialization being fostered by the European expansion, the European amalgamated Moorish expansion. And so the only way to make it more was to break up the history and deal with everybody through each individual colony. So the Spanish had Louisiana and then gave it up to the French instead of letting it go back to the original people. You see what I'm saying? So they just traded one system for the next. But at the time that was going, all of those so-called colonial nations were paying tribute again to the greater empire that was now centralizing itself out of the remaining consuls that existed, both over here and then over there. So being that Trump in his cabinet, in terms of his, I believe it's a Secretary of State, who is an open white supremacist. Nancy Pelosi just put that out. She's an open white nationalist, white supremacist. He is the one in charge of the civil liberties. You understand? Which now creates a system for us. Because within that political system, what you just saw with the Trump, Obama, and Hillary thing was the difference between the Brotherhood of the Eagles and the Brotherhood of Death. So the Brotherhood of Eagles, of which Trump and them is with, created the window for them to get in. So these are all the people that grew up during the Illuminati craze, watching Alex Jones and all that type of stuff. So those people can never be these people. Excuse me. Autochtons, ones who sprung from the soil, the inhabitants, from the Greek autochthon, aborigines, natives, literally sprung from the land itself, used of the Athenians and others who claim descent from the Pelasgians. Who are the Pelasgians? The Pelasgians are the ancient Byzantine. Who are the Byzantine? The Abyssinians. Who are the Abyssinians? The Abbasid. Who are the Abbasid? The Moors. You understand? The Muslims. The empire that stretched in the Caribbean was the Locono. And then in the Locono, you had the Arawak, and then you had the Taino, which was like the Moors that was doing the treaty building. Because they call it Taino Savage, but they're the ones that was negotiating and doing the treaty thing. You understand? Carib, the Caribbean, that was the name that was given by the white man to mean savage, because that was the European colloquialism of that. Also, the Moors always wore the beards, which distinguished them from the Europeans. That's why you see the Europeans and all of them, when they dress up like us in the European movies, they always have the beard, because that was a distinct sign of the lineage of the Asiatics. Showing proof, beard with Asiatics was a badge of manly dignity, in contrast to the Egyptians, who usually shaved their head and the face. As a sign of mourning, it was accustomed to pluck it out and cut it off. The Israelites were forbidden to shave off their corners of their beards, probably because it was regarded as heathenish, and compel a man to cut off his beard was inflict him upon a shameful disgrace. You see? So again, distinctly Asiatic customs adopted by all of these other distinctly opposite races who inherited our customs and mannerisms and incorporated that into their national character, while we fell victim and fell into the web that was created by them based on the religions that they would get Asiatics wrapped up in, such as the Baptists, all the Baptist religions started by the Freemason John Smith, then Charles Parham, who started the Pentecostal faith, Joseph Smith, who of course was under the science of the Moors and all that, Jehovah's Witness. Seventh-day Adventists. And then the one they leaving out is E.D. Baker, who set up the Christ scientists based on the Moorish science that existed at the time. Out of these, all of the blacks that were re-educated as Negroes fell under the tutelage of one of these five systems. But they were all started by Caucasoid Freemasons. Who knew the true nationality of the people they were preaching all of this to. See, the thing is, Rome had been under Moorish control from the time of Severus. That's why they call him Severus, because he severed that aspect of the old empire and brought it back into an Asiatic realm. But they were still Roman. You dig? This was the Sultan of Zanzibar in 1898. Understand? Zanzibar was part of the empire, but that fell to the British in a battle that took 15 minutes based on the cannon fire and then not wanting to destroy all of what we built. When you talk about the Japanese Empire and these people that they were fighting, like this was what the Japanese they was fighting. You understand? See how dark these people are? This is who they wiped out. That's why they hit Nagasaki. Because that's where the true sense of the Naga people oriented is at. In Hiroshima, Heiru, Hiro, Sun, Falcon, right? We would force them after the expulsion of Grenada and the breakup of the empire. Because see, they won because there was Moors helping them do this, which allegedly led to the compact that we call the what you call it, the treaty peace, constitution. So as Moorish Americans, you're descended from these guys. Understand? Who enslaved these guys. So when you see these guys are being funded by guys like this too. But these guys is fighting these guys to prove their worth. Yeah. You have all of that in you because you're Asiatic. Because you were most likely from here. Okay? So in Shakespeare, he would use the term, in some instances, he would use the term Negro and Moor interchangeably. But what we have to remember is that Shakespeare was not law. He was not a law person. And law, the difference is based on the national character. So when we say the Olmecs, the Mound Builders, and the Anasazi, we're talking all of that's us. These people that we see today who exist in these places or whatever, not the darker skinned ones, but the what you call it ones. They're descended from the Anasazi. The dark Hondurans, Bolivians, all them dark Panamanians, Jamaicans, all of this was referred to as the Antilles or the Antilia or the Antilles. This was discovered when Roderick left. The real story of New World was that after Roderick was put out his castle, him and the Visigoths, 7 of the Visigoth kings, left on boats and then went into the Caribbean and established the first ports and all of that stuff that's there. Because the Moors kicked them out, which then means that the Visigoths were all Moors too. And he referred to it as the Antilles. But they didn't get permission to break through and do this until the split came in 1492. All of this. Now you see what it says about the Pueblos, right? Let me see. It says the Anasazi civilization grew in dry lands in the American Southwest. The Anasazi are called the ancient people. They lived in groups of houses that the Spanish later referred to as pueblos, right? And look what the dude from Time Walker says about the pueblos. He says, the spoken as an American Indian today, you get to know that the white man who gives different names. Um, for the Dakota came up with the Sioux, the French expanded. Okay. They are more taken from the Indian. It would also reason that he stole the word more from the Indian so he could hide the true word for a culture, language, a people, and an empire. If he did, he would have a damn good reason. Then he drew a map or got a picture of an old map from the War Department that shows who the ancient people were protected by. The protective armies of the Pueblo, according to the treaties as found in Article 8 of the Indian Manifesto of 1972. Right? The Moorish army posts protecting the Pueblo. Boom, the Moorish country flag. It's right here. That would be here, number 2. So all of this represented what we was doing, what they call the Southwest. We had huge garrisons and castles and all that stuff out there. And we was protecting a lot of these people from what was happening in terms of what was happening in the East, the Northeast and the Southeast portion of the country, based on the old treaties between the Moors that still had dominions outside of what the Spanish was doing to everybody. So when we talk about the Olmecs, the mound builders, the Anasazi, we can say that these people are Moors based upon the uh, constant refusal to give up their nationality to the encroaching government or people who were basically being forced to migrate based upon the Great War that had been going on from 1492 to 1774. That's why we can claim who we are, whatever. So when the prophet said when the European came, he found Moors up and down the Mississippi River. There, to this day, is a place called Grenada, Mississippi, right there on the river. You understand? So it's just a coincidence. So that means everything that's Granada happened over there in Spain. That's what I'm supposed to believe. Give me a second. You can't read this, so I'm going to read it from the actual thing I have on my phone. Okay, let me cue it up. Okay, let's see. Okay, dear sir, your note on the 25th was duly received. Over. This is a letter from the United States to the Tangier consul. What does it say? To explain the cleaner. I'm up here. Okay. Okay. Where it says, I'm right here. What you style the Confederate States, in which they inform you and me that I have helped through the assistance of the Moorish authorities. They are the best of men, nor are they gutless. Escape, they belong exempt, excuse me, extraordinary proceed. Yeah, they are not gulling, except, I'm reading it on the thing, but it's more. They're not guiltless, except that they belong to the Confederate States. And therefore, you demand, and the reader, and think that it is pleased that your excellency, the most extraordinary proceeding, having received the Moorish authority soldiers and made them arms in the pursuance of all proceedings heretofore practiced and acted upon, and your try. First, there is no government known that recognizes the Confederate States, and the captain of the steamer at Fort Sumter and his crew was in my custody are citizens of the federal government of the United States, which I in your empire, all owing allegiance to the same. You understand? This is from the Consulate of the United States of America, right in the Bay of Tangier, letting him know that there are members of the Moorish Empire, Moorish authorities who are supporting the Confederate States, but the Confederate States are not really a recognized thing because they all under the United States. So he's saying that whatever's going down, he don't want them to have any problems based upon these Moors that he don't have no jurisdiction over. With reference to what your excellency alludes to in desiring to pursue the same line of policy that has been adopted in Cadiz and Gibraltar, with reference to the said pirates, you are aware that the regulations by which they are governed in Europe have no reference whatsoever with that of your country, which is regulated by the treaties with foreign governments. I have no doubt that if your excellency had been aware of the facts that you shall 76 years of uninterrupted friendship, meaning payment, that has existed between the government of the United States be brought to an end for the sake of pirates. I trust that this brief note to your excellency that after the explanation given. So right there, we just showed and proved that the legate of the consulate of the United States in 1869 said that they are under the empire of the Moors, and that the Confederate States at this time, who was going through what they was going through, had Moors that was a part of the Confederate States, but they don't have jurisdiction over them. Did everybody hear that? I stumbled a little bit, but you got that right. Look, you can get the letter from the Consul of the United States of America to Tangier, February. What is this? Sorry. February 25th, 1862. Black History Month. You know what I'm saying? But how come anybody talking about that? Everybody's saying that the Moors don't exist, right? There was no Moorish Empire, right? That don't exist. So what's all of this? What's all of this? This is also one I gotta read out because it's a little obscure when you make it bold. It may well be to state that the unsatisfactory situation may be due in great part to the fact that Moorish officials in public may have been led to believe, in view of the periodic agitation which the question of protection causes in Morocco, that the right is shortly to be abolished, and that they can therefore expatriate its abolition with impunity. So they basically made it seem like you couldn't be a Moor with a Moorish nationality unless you were tied to the puppet kingdom that they were creating. Whereas all of us in the empire have fell under the jurisdiction of whatever titles that we was born to believe was ours, such as Spanish or Black or Bolivian or Venezuelan or whatever, or Jamaican, because these were the republics that came out of the establishment or the dissolution of the greater empire over here, which then broke up the empires, kingdoms, and dominions, which then created the nations, countries, and states that we up under now. Right? So here go another one. So you see the scope of what is happening or what has happened in the empire is broader than what we are understanding it or truly putting it in perspective by looking at it from the perspective of being a homegrown, just American thing. It's an American thing, but it's an American thing because it's this was the spearhead of the farthest west. Morocco and China. Washington, March 15th. Early in the present week, the State Department received a telegram from the Consul General Lewis at Tangier, stating that the Moorish authorities were disposed to disregard the Treaty of 1880 in refusing to release from prison certain Moorish subjects under the American protection. Secretary Bayard said at last night that the persons in custody were not American citizens, but native Moors, probably Jews or Arabs, who under the treaty claimed protection of the United States. He did not anticipate any serious trouble and remarked that Lewis thoroughly understood his right under the treaty would be maintained in maintaining them. So what this means is that the way that the treaty works is based on the station of the Moor that's working it. So not all Moors was, let's say, all Moors was considered royal or whatever, right? But not all Moors was nobles in the aspect of them participating in the greater aspect of the government as somebody that was creating a actual voice in how things was moving. You understand? It's like it was today. Some dudes was just on the block, but the block at this time was like the pyramid, or you know what I'm saying, the temple, or the mound, or whatever. And so those who would claim subject to, right, they would be under the greater protection of the the head of the Moorish government or empire, which is great. But their station wasn't. It's also so in that now the United States could step in and say, based on the treaty, we're protecting you as a Moorish subject on behalf of the government because you're not directly connected to it anymore. You understand? So unless you're directly connected, like this blew up because the Moor wrote the consul at Tangier. So he actually had a consul to highlight them about his position. So this also then denotes that citizen can and does mean subject, right? But it's a difference between being subject to and subject of. Everybody is subject to something. As human beings, we are all subject to error, right? Yet we hold efficiency in that in the highest regard. But there's no way that anybody can be right all the time, right? Just like there's no way that anybody can be wrong all the time. It's all based on the timing and the amount of research or whatever was created to maintain this position. You understand what I'm saying? So Moors can give you 1,000 names of kings from Africa, but they can't give you no names of kings or queens from here in America, which is Northwest Africa. So when they say that we're not saying we're African, what we're talking about is the legal definition by which that applies. We're not talking about the cultural and significant creation of that. But that whole concept of Africa and all that was invented based upon them creating a whole story about the dark jungles of Africa and Tarzan and all that. Edgar Rice Burroughs and these type of dudes. You understand? All Freemason dudes like Rudyard Kipling and these guys who create the fantasy jungle book like an actual grizzly bear could exist in the damn jungle. You know what I'm saying? Dancing and singing. Like this is the level of the game. This is the level of the game. There's people in there. In terms of the authority and how they perpetuate that. So these pyramids are just as good as these. But growing up in consciousness, these was the only ones we cared about. So the same Egyptologists that'll go through and go to these caves and do all of that here will go here and not go here, or go here and not make the correlation that the people who built this is the same people. One's in so-called Eastern Africa. This is in Northwestern Africa. You understand? Northwest, Southwestern Africa. So where other people are creating division based upon the complexion of the people, when I look at all the old pictures of Montezuma and these people is the same color as the pictures I see of Shaka Zulu and all that. Matter of fact, they're wearing the same clothes. That means they're part of the empire. They had a unified color, red and green. Why is that the color everywhere? That's just a color they just happen to use. Like, come on, man. This was going out on Friday night at one point. You understand? This was everyday life. And at some point in history, in some earth, this never stopped. We still like this. Because we still like this now. We could do this right now. What we are looking at right now, we could do this right now. This is what Doc was trying to do in Georgia. But to do that, you got to establish a government. All history, especially Western sanctioned history, is coming from the perspective of the colonized mind. So it's not going to be anything connected to anything of direct substance. Understand what I'm saying? Direct substance is given to it once we accept what we are believing we are, because these classes and things like this are a reinforcement to the understanding of what you assigned yourself to be. So this means for all of these years you were under mind control. Now you're mind controlling yourself. And the mode of doing that is this. And so because people know that and people prey on that, you see, there has to be another way for people to associate themselves with something outside of what they're being preyed on for. The Mali expeditions and the arrival of the Aztecs occurred close enough in time to consider whether there was a connection between the two events. The Mali transatlantic voyages became critically important when I remembered that Mazuma said that the Aztecs were foreigners who arrived recently aboard ships that had come from the direction of where the sun rises. From Mexico, West Africa's Mali was in the same direction as the rising sun. Spanish writers who saw the Aztecs and who knew the same clothing was used by the Africans called the Moors. This is from Horace Butler book. Historians agree that the Aztec capital city Tenochtitlan was built about 325 AD. That date short series events in 325 did not exclude the Mali colonists who explorers who left in 1300. It was the Malian expedition that brought the elephants and all of that stuff back to America. And that was a part of Abu Bakari, which was the product of what Mansa Musa had done. You see what I'm saying? So it wasn't like people was just willy-nilly over here, like just kind of like waiting for people to come in and take the land. It didn't happen how they did it. The empire just fractured. And then the remnants of the empire went into the new system as to whatever it is they were supposedly called. Before considering in detail the outline of its history down to the destruction of Jamestown, it would be well to note here an important fact, namely that there was descendants of African race in the United States whose lineages is traceable to the slaves of the West India Islands, brought there first by the Spaniards. At the time America was discovered, Spain was at war with the Moors, who were driven from and followed into Africa. The captured Moors and Negroes taken with them, called blackamoors, were enslaved, and many of them were transported to Spanish settlements in the New World. To the Spaniard, then generally principal in his historic cruelty, may be charged with the crime of American slavery, with the Dutch and English later as accessories. So everybody knows, you know what I'm saying, but the Negro. All of these books talking about the Moors and how people couldn't rock with them and what people couldn't do to them and whatever. You know what I'm saying? Totally different. So this is why you can get the Indian money and you can be white and you can be Moorish American and you can be Asiatic and you can be Negro, black and colored, so long as it's not under a legal caste system. You see what I'm saying? All at the same time. Because all of the colonies divested in money based upon having to pay the dirty Moors that they were trying to break away from. So they discourage the Moorish thing based on whatever men did. Dr. Newton moved and took over. Each man coldly eyed and reminded them of the age-old genocidal custom. Boys, the key here is their youth. Them are the young nigger bucks, he said, starting with the men down, like the one today. If we continue to eliminate the strong, healthy young bucks, then we can control the race. He reached into the jacket pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, wiped his mouth, and concluded, we can have their women anytime we want. That's not the problem. They'll come to us in their own free will because we have the power. He looked over at the Klansmen seriously and continued, we'll always have their women disrespecting them. He paused a moment. A woman don't want no man she can't respect. Their own women won't respect her. We have to follow the plan our forefathers laid out. These niggers will advance if we don't stop them. They will. Why, just look at them over here. You see, this was all quotes about Black Wall Street. You see, they know. So now they have an open Klansman. They had a black man backed by a Klansman in the last administration. Now they got a white man who's actually a Klansman in this administration. Now they're trying to take the KKK off of the terrorist list. See, it's more psychological. It's Dr. Ben. You understand? And remember, he's a Jew. Bless the dead. You understand? So in a sense, everybody has been preserving the secret, but the secret is really an open secret. And it's really based on how you look at it more so than how it looks at you. A serious difficulty had occurred between the United States and Morocco. A Jew under American protection whose conduct had given offense to the Moorish authorities was imprisoned, and the United States consul at Tangiers applying for redress was met with a refusal. The United States government threatened to bombard of Tangier unless an ample apology is at once made by the Moorish authorities for the insult offered to the American power. The dispute has arisen between the United States and Morocco owing to the imprisonment of a Jew under the protection of the American consul. So you see, because the Jews were the bankroll for the Confederacy and all that. Because they were the ones who inherited the banking system and kept it intact from the times of Grenada. This is how Rothschild and these niggas was able to do all the stuff they was doing, because they took the name of the Red Shield, right? And we know what the Red Shield is, right? So if Moor isn't a nationality, then why would they put it on a card? This is an old card that had mad different nationalities in it. This is the Moorish one. There'd be no occasion for fear if you saw him as he is shown here. You'd be likely to greet him, take a corporal sweep. In fact, you might say, have a beer. So when you see them more like this, you greet them. So what they talking about? You understand what I'm saying? So then they say, oh, well, ish means like. You know somebody who always want to just find something wrong with what you're doing? Always want to like, always find a reason why it's not going to work, why it's not going to be. That's these people with their culture, man. They'll big up their African ancestors all day, but then their Moorish ancestors, they say, oh, they enslaved us. But your African ancestors enslaving you now. You know what I'm saying? They say, oh, well, ish means that. But ish denotes a nationality. In actual terms. That's why you say Spanish. There's a Spain, right? There's a Israel, right? Right? There's a Dutch land, right? Swedish. There's a Sweden, right? Right? There's an Irish and there's an Ireland. So what? Those aren't nationalities? You see what I'm saying? So it worked for them, but it don't work for you. No, this is what they scared to go back to. All of this type of stuff. To the point where this is actually in Hollywood right now. The gates into Babylon is actually in Hawaii. Is in Hollywood. In MGM, I think. You understand? That's how much they live your culture. You understand? So they make you question and doubt everything about yourself, and then they win because you don't know what to do. So the best thing to do is to start with yourself and your family. That's what I'm saying. Like, regards to what I'm telling you, I could tell people these niggas want to be what they are. You understand what I'm saying? Like they think that the Falcons and the Patriots are real teams. They think that this is not part that what they think that the script only applies when you in Hollywood. Don't they know that Hollywood films in other cities? You understand what I'm saying? Like what you think, oh, so that's fake, but this is real. Okay, whatever. So I want the Falcons to win because I want the black Heru to win. And that's what subconsciously everybody who's rooting for the Falcons really want. Because the Patriots represent the Sons of Liberty and the Knights of Pythias and the Tea Party and the KKK and the rest of these people. You understand what I'm saying? Because everybody knows that too. But nobody's saying that because to say that would be openly racist. You understand? So they dehumanized the original man to the point that he can't express himself individually. But the law says you have the right to go back to whatever nationality or government you see fit, regardless to what executive order this person is putting out. So what that means then, when they try to charge you for something that's your right, based upon your original position, not under the protectorship of the U.S., but under the original jurisdiction of your said government, which again is subject to a foreign power, that power being today Allah, that Sharif or Sultan today being, other than yourself, the Prophet, who created something in the world for you to go back into a system like that. So when we get into the proper definition, an American Indian is somebody like this. A Moor is somebody like this. A Turk, according to them, is somebody like this. But when we look at the Indian today, the so-called East African Moor today, and the so-called Turk today, they're all white people. But all of that happened within the span of 80 years in what we refer to as World War I and World War II. That was to reduce the population of the original aristocracy and original people on the planet, and then to impose a system by which they could be maintained, and then create a system based on illegal theft of birthright to take them out of that by telling them they're a bunch of different things. See, the Moors of the Sahara and of the Negro nations, always a distinction, yet used interchangeably. Yet one has a nationality and an imperial definition, and the other has a slave definition. Because there's no such thing as a Negro nation. Name one Negro nation you know. They don't even call African nations Negro nations because Africans were never Negroes. Moors were made into Negroes. Africans were colonized. That's why they still got their own language. Right. That's why you can't get it caught up in what they talking about. You got to know how deep you going with it. This was the crown. This is the crown that's worn, but was worn by the Holy Roman Empire. The last Holy Roman Emperor that they shot that started World War II, Archduke Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand. This is his crown. The head of the Holy Roman Empire up until 1898. And again, when they killed him, they went to war because he was the last one carrying the blood of these dudes. This again is from the Pelagians that we spoke about earlier, Byzantine. See? You just got the text. The what you call it's one. Patriots won. 31. 31 degrees. Right? They beat the Falcons, what? Patriots scored 31 unanswered points. Beat Falcons 34-28. Right? In the first Super Bowl to ever end in an overtime. So you know it's fixed. You understand what I'm saying? Because the white nationalists, the patriots, is in power. That's what they showing you now. But the Queen, remember Miss Columbia lost. The America that lost. So Columbia's they got us. So they already down. So now that they got us is down, they got to bring their people up. So now Beyonce's pregnant with Janus, the twins. See how it works? See how it all goes in a nice little package for you? You ain't even got to think about it. This is the money of your forefathers. This is where all our money's at. And look at the pyramid. That ain't no Egyptian pyramid. I mean, this is an old Egyptian pyramid. This is a step pyramid. This is Zosa's first. You see, there's a door going in. You could go in this. And there was no point because there was no limit to how far you could build it. You understand the difference? And so once they put the capstone on it, that became it. This was still forming. This is still forming. This is us. The oldest step pyramid in Africa is the oldest pyramids in Africa still is the step pyramid, right? And where all the step pyramids at? Right, in Africa, but just over here. This Africa. Right? All I'm saying is call it what it is, man. This is the America we come from. See that? See these people? And then this represents the levels of galactic harmony, which is why the levels were so steep when you climbed it. So when they talk to you about the Moorish Empire, right, they're vague. I'll be direct. I'm saying all lands protracted from between 3 degrees northeast of present-day Mogadishu and 22 degrees north latitude at Yemen, Moab 3 degrees west of Sevilla, 12 degrees east of the Kingdom of Axum, which is a Mexim over there, and 42 degrees east longitude, 2,982 miles latitude southwest Africa, 12 degrees east longitude southwest of Moab at Luanda, Angola, just below the Congo, across the Great Atlantis River or Ocean, even unto the present farthest west before the time of Al-Aqsa. From the top of Al-Malacanos Estados, which is here, 72 north latitude, 4,940 miles, 150 west longitude equals 21 miles above the equator from Moab, which is then 33,160 miles, with Central and Mesoamerica, including present-day Mexico, and Atlantis Islands at 19 degrees north latitude, which is 3,640 miles southwest longitude and 40 miles below the equator from Moab, including the first Moorish empires of China and India, namely the Mahajapahtas and the kingdom of the Mahagadhan, which was the Khmer and Angkor Wat Empire at Borobudur, and the Mauryan Naga empires, and all of their ancient lands and dominions, and all of the lands annexed then by Hanno Bay at Kasakumit in what is now Chesapeake Bay, written in stone, protected by the Bourne Society. So this brings the total of the Sultanate's land holdings in the divine right of allodium to the geographical span of over 15,376 miles, equivalent to 236,421,376 square acres of land. That's your vast estate. That's what that encompasses you as a Moorish American. Because anywhere you go, you will be welcome based upon your nationality. Because now that the dirty Moors is basically out there, the clean Moors are the ones that everybody wants. And those are the ones that are dealing from an international perspective. So this way, when you travel, you're traveling with your fez and turban and all that to these countries. You understand? So now they're going to treat you in your capacity based upon your ancient forefathers' name and you coming in that presence. So now that they could talk to you about certain things and you can ask them about certain things that they will now reveal based upon them being under the obligation of all of these different orders that have come through the years to keep it secret from you. We are not indebted to the ancient Egypt for either religion or masonry, but to America. It is in fact that Memphis, Egypt, and the pyramids, under the guidance of the kings and the mystic rites of masonry, were worked many thousands of years ago, but at this time Egypt and the continent of America were one and the same. In America, rediscovered in the 15th century, repopulated in the 17th century, was the recovered Egypt and the promised land and the land of the constellation of the eagle, which represents the scorpion, which represents the tip of Scorpius and the tip of the arrow of Sagittarius. So we are the temple. We are all of that. So when we're reading these books about the first colonists and the first explorers and these people, these Europeans, these are the Europeans they talk about. And under them were white conquistadors and slaves and Jews, or people who labeled that, and dirty Moors who was under the jurisdiction of them based upon that. You understand? In Time Magazine, ISBN 0812940847-3, they produced a copy of the oldest known map of North America. In the article, it stated that the ancient Libyan Arabic script, that's Moorish Kufic, 1st century BC, in the center of the continent, Nevada, is the word MR, which is more, and possibly being the origin of the word America or Morocco. Ancient Libyan script from 1st century BC, but they told you that Islam didn't start until the 7th century. So what are they talking about? So which is it? You see what I'm saying? If it wasn't for people like Uriel and people like I said, Myra Shearer L and some of the C. Freeman L and these Moors, we wouldn't, and people don't even know about them because they've erased the history. Or they trying to. But his work is right there. Everybody can order the geodetic survey. It's a legal document, enshrined. You understand what I'm saying? White children were kidnapped in the British Isles at the rate of 7,000 yearly in 17th and 18th centuries and sold into slavery in America and the West Indies. Sometimes they were bootlegged and sold as Negroes. White Americans in the North and South were also kidnapped and seduced and sold as Negroes as late as 1859. One of the most celebrated cases of a white person sold as a Negro was Sandy Mueller, who held in servitude in Louisiana for 26 years. Court after court ruled against her. Finally, a birth certificate was dug up in Germany, and she was freed by the Supreme Court in 1818. You understand? They was kidnapping princes and princesses and ransoming them to build up money for the war chest that would eventually be the break. In Arabia and northern parts of North Africa, white persons, mostly women, are still held as slaves and many as Negroes. Sometimes the owners of these white slaves are Negroes. You understand? The first slaves held in the United States were not black but white. They were Europeans, mostly British, who died like flies in the slave ships. On June 14th, perished 1,500. At another time, 350 and 400. In Virginia, white servitude was for a limited period, but was sometimes extended to life. In the West Indies, particularly in the case of the Irish, it was for life. White people were sold in the United States up to 1826. 15 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, was a runaway and was advertised for in the papers. You understand? In 1670, Virginia passed a law forbidding Negroes from buying white people. This is how much we was buying white people. This is how much we was enslaving and buying white people. This is how crazy black we became. These dirty Moors was bugging. Forbidding Negroes from buying white people. This was 51 years after the Negro had arrived and changed. The same law was repeated in 1748. Free Negroes bought white people in such numbers in Louisiana that the state made a similar law in 1818. You understand? So where was the slaves at? If everybody was buying white people, who was creating the law to help not enslave them? You see what I'm saying? With only 6 companions, Nat Turner freed over, what is that? How many slaves is that? from 100 and something amazing facts about the Negro. What's this number? I'm bugging. What was that? That's 3 million? Oh, with only 6 companions, Turner set out to free 3 million. Okay. See why you gotta read? The United States Marines and 2 warships were sent against him after he had killed 55 whites and captured several plantations. The Seminoles, or runaways, a mixed Indian and Negro descent of Florida, fought 3 wars with the United States to preserve their freedom, their nationality. So again, man, they ain't talking about this in Black History Month because this empowers you. You understand? Moorish history empowers the Negro, and that's not what they're trying to really do. And it empowers them in a manner that brings them back into their regal status and giving them a moral compass and center. That's why the temple is good in the dogma and all of that. It's good to go to fellowship and just talk about Moors and the prophet. It's good to do that. But you got to actively live that to not fall under the protection or jurisdiction then of the United States, by always declaring what jurisdiction you yourself are under, which is that, of course, of our law, but more of your individual countenance, which is your temple, which is your arm, leg, arm, head. Right? You know what I'm saying? So again, a memorial to Congress of the United States urging them to enact such legislation as deemed fit to declare the 14th and 15th Amendments void, right? To no effect. Whereas the state of Georgia, together with 10 other southern states, have declared that the Union, that the lately in the rebellion against the United States following the termination of hostilities in 1865, met all the conditions laid down by the President of the United States in exercise of constitutional powers to recognize the governments of the states, domestic as well as foreign. See that? That shows 2 different people. From the resumption of the practical relations of the government of the United States and the state and proper and constitutional relation to the United States. So this basically says that because the 14th and 15th Amendment were never ratified, then that means everything according to that has to now be brought into question, which then brings the Union into question. This fact is what will void most judgments against them, because their power over so-called African Americans and Negroes come from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Because those were the citizens created by the United States, i.e. the citizens directly under the United States protection. But the Moors didn't fall directly under the United States protection so long as they proclaimed themselves subject to the foreign power, which coincidentally the United States still pays money into, albeit the foreign power is now under the jurisdiction of Saudi Arabia. But we'll see what happens with this crazy person in office. Anybody have any questions? You gotta remember the Declaration of White Supremacy that led to the destruction of all of what we read about officially went down between what they call the Wilmington race riots and the destruction of Black Wall Street. Up until then, blacks in different sectors were coalescing together in rich communities. And then based on that, that led to the destruction of what happened. So this, again, is, as we close, is the 3rd prophecy of Muhammad. It is a tribute to Muhammad himself and may be formed in the basis of other prophecies, but it was asked at the end of the world what would happen thereafter to his community. Muhammad replied that the world would come to an end when most of the perverse worst people appear at a time when part of his particular community will still be in an island situated in the extreme west, which is called Andalusia. So Andalusia and Al-Maghreb represents the extreme west, right? The people of this community will be the last of its inhabitants, and all calamities will befall them because of their neglect of their religious law and worldliness. Neglecting prayers, indulging in luxury, minors among them do not respect the elderly, nor do the elderly compassion for the minors. Injustices, false oaths, right? Freemasonry. Among them, merchants purchase and sell usury, which is debt, and deceit, interest, and deceit and covet properties. These and other evils will become the manifest, and God will subject them to a people worse than they. They will be tormented, cruel governors who will rule over them. Their property will be confiscated for no reason, and they will be captive and subject to the killing and conversion, and will worship images of idols. They will be obligated to eat bacon, and will endure other oppressions to the point of hopelessness and despair. God will punish their sins, and he will also have pity on them, and will forgive them when those evils are eradicated, when they return to the practice of their religious law. Right? But now we're not talking about the religion of Islam like we know it today. We're talking about the people who fostered something to allow him to create a religion for people who at the time were savage. Right? The cruelty imposed will be so intense that the angels will become vexed and will appear before the Almighty God. His attention to their plight is it is then that God, the Avenger, will send someone to rescue them from their miserable condition. This will take place when the new year falls on a Saturday. God will then send a sign consisting of a cloud of birds, two of which will represent the angels of Gabriel and Michael, and the first from the clouds will be followed by the other birds of the earth to announce the coming king of the east and the west, who will take Andalusia. The conflict between Islam and Christianity will end with the return to the law of the Moors. There will be much cloud in that year, scarcity of water, trees bearing extra fruits, and other signs. So, if we read in that, and this is from a book called Islam in the West, the Moriscos, by Anwar G. Chechny. You can get the other book, African Presence in Early Asia, African Presence in Early America, and African Presence in America Revisited, as well as Othello's Children in the New World and Wars in Barbary. A lot of those books talk about a lot of the stuff we talked about tonight. And again, you can show and prove that because this was, again, a legitimate prophecy from day Jesus. Like Muhammad is day Jesus. So he knew about the Moors. So obviously, it's all going back to somebody calling himself that. So in that, we just need to understand who we are more individually to be able to come collectively and actually make something happen. So thank you guys for coming through. Thank you for $30 to duketears@gmail.com. Thank you again for the continued support. And if you guys have any questions, you can email me at houseofval@hotmail.com. All right. Peace.